What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over how you can improve your aim in Fortnite, and this video is going to be mostly from the perspective of a controller player because I do play controller. This is something I get asked about a bunch, and while I do have some tips and some practices that may help you get better at aiming, at the end of the day, aiming is just like a mechanical skill and it's just muscle memory, so there's nothing I can really tell you that's going to make like a drastic, like overnight, immediate improvement in how well you are at aiming or how good you are at aiming. It's really something that you just have to put the time in and practice, and the more you play the game and the more you practice, the better your aim will get. But I'm going to be going over like some mistakes and some general like practices that can help you get better at aiming. If you guys do find this video helpful or informative, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you would like to see more, and comment down below if you play controller or mouse and keyboard. I'm interested to see that on this video. This is something I've asked in the past, but it's been a while since then, so comment if you play controller or mouse and keyboard on this video. The first thing we're going to talk about when it comes to aiming, because settings are pretty important, and that is going to be your sensitivity and how you want to set it up. This is something where I see a lot of people going wrong because they just, especially in the controller community, people just go around the streams or YouTube videos looking for other players' sensitivities and then copying that sensitivity and then not being too happy when it doesn't work out for them. And there's no best sensitivity in the game. Like, my sensitivity works well for me, but there might be another player who hates my sensitivity and their sensitivity wouldn't work well for me. It's all about preference and playstyle when it comes to sensitivity. So copying somebody else's sense could be a decent starting point if you think you have like a similar playstyle to that person. But if you copy someone's sensitivity that doesn't really feel good for you and doesn't work for you, and you keep forcing yourself to play with that sensitivity because you think it's better, this is going to be hurting you a lot in the long run. So I would really not worry too much about trying to force yourself or trying to copy someone's sensitivity or just being in the mindset that there is a perfect sensitivity. It's all preference and it's all playstyle, and there's a reason why pretty much every top player has a different sensitivity. You know, if there was one perfect sensitivity that was like by far and away the best, everyone would use it. But the fact that everyone uses a different one kind of goes to show that there is no perfect sensitivity. When you are setting up your sensitivity, I would recommend using the advanced options, turning the boosts all the way down. I do not like having the boosts on. I don't think it's very good. When it comes to your vertical and horizontal sensitivity, you just want to set that up for what feels good hip firing. So don't worry about building, don't worry about editing, don't worry about ADS shots, just worry about what feels good with hip firing and tracking people while hip fire when it comes to your horizontal and vertical sensitivity. And the reason why that's all you want to worry about with those settings is because we have a build sense if you do play those modes, we have an edit sense. So regardless of what your base X and Y sensitivity is, you can compensate with a build and edit sense if you do like play a low one. And then the same goes for ADS. Like, some people use a higher ADS, some people use a lower ADS, but since we do have ADS as its own setting, you don't really want to like take that into account as much when it comes to your horizontal and vertical sensitivity. And then the same is true with ADS sensitivity when it comes to like turning the boost off. I don't really like it. Apparently turning the boost ramp time to 0.20 seconds improves aim assist, so that's why I have that on. Look dampening time I have at 0. I use linear, but exponential can be good as well. And then dead zones, I feel like you just want to have those set to whatever the lowest you can have them without getting stick drift. And this is going to make a huge difference in your gameplay because a lot of people have the base dead zones on or the default dead zones on, and those are pretty high by comparison, and it makes your controller just feel not as reactive as possible. So play around with it and see what dead zones or how low you can put them without getting stick drift, and then use that. Dead zones are basically just how much you have to move your analog stick before movement happens in game, and it's kind of there to correct stick drift and the fact that every controller is just mass produced and feels different. So the lowest you can put them without getting stick drift is what you want to do. So that's what it comes to with settings. And the best way to practice and get used to new settings is going to be in creative, and I will have 2 creative maps in this video towards the end of the video, but the codes will also be in the description for those maps that are good areas for you guys to practice and get used to sensitivity and just practice aiming in general. So that's going to be the settings portion of this video. One of the biggest things you can do to improve your aim and consistency with aiming in game, and this goes for any shooter, is that's just to have good crosshair placement. A lot of newer players or a lot of lesser experienced players, you watch them play and their crosshair just kind of naturally drifts to the ground, and that's not very good because your enemies are not going to be on the ground, and so you're going to have to move your crosshair up to adjust to where the people are. So you want to try to keep your crosshair at head or body level as much as possible and try to predict where people are. This can be a huge difference maker in build fights and edit fights, and just any fight where you're fighting in close quarters or around a building, in a building. having good crosshair placement and being able to predict like where the opponent will be and where they'll peek from will minimize how much you have to actually move your crosshair and aim. So if you have good crosshair placement, you don't have to aim, or you don't have to adjust your aim as much, and that's going to make it much easier for you to consistently hit shots, and it's going to make it much faster for you as well. So try to practice having good crosshair placement as much as possible. If you are someone who finds that you're always putting your crosshair on the ground accidentally, or it's just like kind of drifting there, that'd be the best way to describe it based on like watching people who have that problem. Just try to correct that and somewhat focus on having good crosshair placement. This will be like awkward at first, but the more you do this and the more you get used to it and the more you kind of understand and predict where other players are, the easier it'll be for you to do this, and it'll just kind of become like second nature. And this kind of works as well with the ADS weapon. So when you ADS with the AUG, it'll go where the dot is on your hipfire. So you can walk around like and make large adjustments with your hipfire, and then ADS, and that red dot will automatically be where the dot in the center of your crosshair is. So if you need to make large adjustments, don't like ADS sweep all the way there, because odds are you probably have a much lower ADS sensitivity than your base hipfire sensitivity. So if you need to make large adjustments, hipfire is going to be the way to go, or just drag un-ADSing, moving your crosshair, and then re-ADSing, if that makes any sense. I've had this asked to me on stream when like I have somebody in the sky and I'm trying to shoot them, and I'm kind of like un-ADSing and then moving my crosshair a little bit and then re-ADSing. It's just because it's easier to make those fast adjustments while you're in the hipfire, and you could just re-ADS just fine, and there's no problem there. Another thing with the AUG that can be really beneficial is left stick aiming. So this is going to be strafing or moving your character side to side to adjust for your aim being slightly off, because if you're slightly off to the right, it's easier just to move your character that way than it is to move your aim to the right for whatever reason. Just left stick aiming usually adds a lot of consistency for those long range shots if you need to make like really small precise adjustments. And this is true in like every shooter I've ever played in my life, like Call of Duty, Halo, Battlefield, Fortnite, like any shooter that's like first person, long range shots, if you can like move your character to compensate your aim, it makes things way easier. And this should go without saying, but when it comes to the AUG, make sure your dot is on the opponent before you pull the trigger. I've seen so many people just full spray the AUG constantly and just try to hope that they hit shots. And I feel like people would kind of do this with the MK as well, since it was full auto. They would just kind of fire and then try to drag their crosshair onto the person. But with a burst weapon, you have that delay between shots, so you want to make sure that your crosshair is actually on the person when you pull the trigger. I know that sounds so self-explanatory, and you're like, why would you say that? Like, obviously you want to have your crosshair on the opponent when you shoot. But you'd be surprised at how many people just full spray burst weapons without really thinking about it. And when they consciously make the effort to make sure their crosshair is on the opponent before they pull the trigger, they end up being much more accurate. I do kind of notice myself doing this sometimes if I've been playing for a long time and I get kind of lazy, not putting as much effort into aiming. And the more conscious effort you put into aiming, the much easier it actually is. So yeah, that could be a huge difference maker with the AUG, because missing shots adds a lot to your TTK with that weapon because of the delay. As far as bloom-based weapons go, I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily understand bloom-based weapons as well, especially people who came in for zero builds because they didn't play for years with the bloom-based weapons. And since zero builds got added, we have the first-person weapons like the MK and the AUG. So people are used to just playing off of them, and whenever they have to use something like the Ranger AR, the Hammer AR, even the SMGs, they don't really understand it. So the dot that's in your center of your crosshair is misleading with the bloom-based weapons. Your bullet is not always going to go where the dot is with the bloom-based weapons. It only actually goes where the dot is if you have first shot accuracy. So if you wait to shoot and the weapon gets first shot accuracy where all of the crosshairs close to the dot, that's when it'll be perfectly accurate. But with the bloom-based weapons, the more you shoot, the less accurate the weapon gets. As those crosshairs expand, the bullet can go anywhere within the crosshairs. Like if you were to make a circle connecting the outer edge of the dashes, the bullet could go anywhere within there. So when it comes to aiming a bloom-based weapon, you want to just put as much of the opponent in your crosshair as possible. Like you want to fill as much of your crosshair with the opponent as possible. That way you're more likely to hit shots. I see a lot of people just going for straight headshots long range with a bloom-based weapon, and like they'll not hit any shots, and then they'll be raging about how the dot was on the person's head and they weren't hitting any shots. And that's because if you were in that situation and you kind of think about it, the whole top half of their crosshair was not on the person at all if they had the dot on their head long range. So they only had the bottom half of their crosshair on the person. So they only have like a 50% chance to hit any of those shots. So when it comes to bloom-based weapons, I wouldn't worry about going for headshots as much unless you're like pretty close range with something like the combat SMG. But you just want as much of your crosshair occupied by the opponent as possible. This is typically going to be just going for body shots. This is the weapons that Fortnite had for like 3 years. And so, like, controlling bloom and understanding bloom was, like, a major point in the game that a lot of newer players just haven't had to deal with because we have the perfectly accurate weapons in Chapter 3. A recoil is another thing I see a lot of comments about and people not understanding, and it's actually really funny because I get comments from both ends of the spectrum. I have, like, keyboard players telling me that the recoil is too much and that only controller players can use those guns. And then I have controller players commenting saying only keyboard players can use those guns because of the recoil. And in reality, both inputs can use weapons like the hammer AR and the combat SMG. I know several controller players that like using both of those weapons, and I know several keyboard players that like using those weapons. The key is just controlling recoil. So if you play on controller, when you shoot the combat SMG, you want to be pulling your right analog stick down a little bit while you're firing the weapon to kind of counteract the recoil. And same with the hammer AR, but it does have a little side-to-side movement, so you have to kind of pull down into the left, I think, or down into the right. But yeah, you just need to pull your analog stick down or opposite the direction of the recoil. If a gun goes up into the left, you need to pull down into the right. If a gun goes up into the right, you need to pull down into the left. If a gun goes straight up, you need to just pull straight down a little bit. And learning how much you need to like actually put pressure on the analog stick to counter the recoil is just something like you get from trial and error and practice using the weapon. And then the same goes with mouse and keyboard. You know, if you're playing mouse, just pull your mouse slightly down in the direction opposite of the weapon's recoil. And this is something that kind of blows my mind that people have been struggling with as much because so many other shooters have recoil in the game that you have to control. And as far as games go, Fortnite does not have much recoil. Like, I was playing Warzone for most of 2020 and 2021. I quit Fortnite during Chapter 2. And a lot of those guns have a decent amount of recoil, way more so than like the Fortnite weapons. Like the combat SMG is kind of seen as like the high recoil weapon in Fortnite. That would be like an incredibly low recoil weapon in Warzone. So you definitely can learn to control the recoil on these weapons. It just takes a little bit of time and effort. And I feel like a lot of people, like, that thought process of controlling recoil just never even clicked in their head. They just thought people were getting no recoil if they watched like gameplay on a video or a stream. But when I have no recoil on my combat SMG, it's because I'm slightly pulling down on my right analog stick. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is creative. I said before at the start of the video that the biggest thing that's going to have an impact on your aim is just practicing and putting in the time and building that muscle memory and building that comfortability with your sensitivity. And I have 2 maps to show that can kind of help with that. So the first map is just going to be a training map. This has several different courses for shotgun aim, has rooms for assault rifle aim, SMG aim, where you can fight bots. And there's also rooms for like building and editing practice as well, if that's what you want to do. This is a warm-up map that I use every day before I get on. And then the other map is going to be the pit. This is basically a huge free-for-all where you can use any weapon, and it does have building enabled. And I know a lot of you play 0 builds, but even though building is enabled in this, you could just practice aiming. You can practice auging people from far away and getting those shots in. You can practice your SMG spraying. You can still fight these people even though they are building, and you can get that muscle memory in. You can get that practice in because like 1 minute in the pit, you can get an incredible amount of fights in. You can get so many fights in really fast, and that is going to be the best way for you to get comfortable with your sensitivity, find what sensitivity feels comfortable and works for you, and also just like build a muscle memory with aiming in general and controlling the recoil of these weapons in general. So I wouldn't be too turned off about the building in the pit. I could use the AR and just fry so many people with the AUG. Even if they are building, like, it's decent practice for you because it makes it harder to hit the shots. And if you do want to practice your building and editing as well, this is a great way to practice fighting. And it's one of the like best creative maps I've seen, and it always has people playing it. This is another thing I do pretty much every day before I get on and stream. So that is going to be it for today's video. I hope these tips helped you improve your aim or learn something new about Fortnite. If they did, remember to give the video a like, subscribe if you would like to see more, comment down below if you use controller or keyboard, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.